Okay guys, today we're going to be working on graphing sinusoidal curves. So first I have a quick tip for you. So if this is your graph, and let's say this is sine. Sine goes like this, and I like to think of the S to stand for swervy because it swerves like that. And then cosine, you could remember that it's C, which is curvy. So that's just one quick trick that will help you tell the difference of a sine and a cosine graph.
So when you're graphing a sine equation, the first thing you want to do is look at what your y coordinates are going to be. So how you tell that is you look at this number at the very end. And since we have plus 3, we're going to go up 3 for our midpoint. And then since we have a 4 in the front of the equation, we go up 4 and down 4 for our other two y coordinates. The next thing we want to do is look at where our first x coordinate is going to be, and that's going to be this point. So in this case, if it's x plus 6 pi over 7, then we're going to change this sign to a negative and go x minus 6 pi over 7 as our first x coordinate, and you always do that when you're graphing sine. To look at the first x coordinate, you always change this sign. So we're going to go backwards from here to approximately negative 6 pi over 7. The next thing you want to do is find out where your last point in the cycle is going to be. So how you do that is you take this number right here and we plug it into an equation that we call PB equals 2 pi. P is the length of one cycle, or the distance from your first point. B is your stretch factor, and that means it tells you how horizontally compressed the graph is. So right now we're given the stretch factor, and how we change that into the distance from the first point to the second point. This number right here is always your B, so we're going to plug it into the equation to find the length of one cycle, so basically where our last point will be. So then to divide both sides by 3/4, we're going to times this side by the reciprocal. To get P by itself, which is going to equal 8 pi over 3. So that is our length of one cycle. So the next thing to do to find the last point is do the first point plus the length, and that will equal the last point. So over here, negative 6 pi over 7 plus 8 pi over 3 equals last point. So I'm going to change these fractions so that they will add to making both bottoms 21. So this one I have to times the whole fraction by 3. So negative 18 pi plus times this whole fraction by 7 to make the bottom 21. And that's going to equal 38 pi over 21. The last thing to take into consideration when you're graphing your last point is where your middle point is, if it's either on this side of the y-axis or this side of the y-axis. And the way to find that out is to compare your first and last point. So our first point is negative 6 pi over 7, and our last point is 38 pi over 21. So to compare these, I want to set them to the same denominator, so I'm going to make this point into the bottom being 21, so times 3 on the bottom times 3 on the top. So this is another way of wording our first point, and this is our last point. And which one is bigger from 0? 38 is bigger than negative 18 from 0, so that means that this point is going to be farther away from the y-axis than this point is, making the middle point on the positive side. So 38 pi over 21 is going to be more over here, making the middle of these 2 points being more on this side of the y-axis. Finally, when we want to graph it, for sine equations, we have our first dot at the middle of our y-coordinates, so 3, so this point. So we want to go our first x-coordinate up to 3, make a dot, and then our middle point is going to be at this middle location. You don't have to find an exact number for the middle coordinate unless it asks you to, but so I've basically drawn out the points of where our graph is going to be going, and it's going to be shaped like this. Even though I didn't do a good job drawing the half circles, it should be shaped somewhat like that. So this number will always tell us if the beginning will go up or down. If this were a -4, this graph would be starting and going down. But since it's a positive, we go up first, back to the 3 y coordinate in the middle of the cycle, and then go down to the last x coordinate. And that's how you graph sine. The final step that you cannot forget after you graph your graph is to label the first and last dot in your cycle. So this is going to be -6 pi over 7 as your x coordinate and 3 as your y coordinate. And this is going to be positive 38 pi over 21 as your x coordinate and 3 as your y coordinate. And those are going to be the answers that Mr. Reader is looking for, plus also how the shape of your graph is, and he's also going to grade these points. So make sure you know how to do those.
Okay, so this one's going to be pretty similar to the last one we did, except you have to be careful because Mr. Reader loves to trick you on these ones. So first we have to take notice that this one says 2 cycles. So it'll be similar to the other one, but we'll be doing 2 cycles, okay? So first we're going to look at the y value that's already given to us, which will be -4, and we're going to go ahead and plot that on the y-axis at -4, about -4. And then we're going to look at this number. Now this number means you're going to go up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would get you to +1. And then also down 5, which would bring you to -9. Okay, so next, we're going to find our next point, which would be the end of the first cycle. So we're going to do that by using the equation like before, PB equals 2 pi. And we're going to insert B, which was given to us in the equation, which is always located right there. So P 12 over 7 equals 2 pi. And then we're going to do P equals 2 pi over 1 times the reciprocal, 7 over 12, which would get you 14 pi over 12. Now to find the end of your first cycle, you just take that number and add it to the point, the x coordinate that was given to you, which would be -9 pi over 8 plus 14 pi over 12. Now we just have to find a common denominator, which in this case would be 24. So we got 24, 24, and the first number would be negative 27 over 24 plus 28 over 24, which gets you 1 over 24. Now, normally you would plot that point and then you could complete your graph, but since it's 2 cycles, we're just gonna add another one of the cycles, which we found was 14 over 12, and then change to 28 over 24. So now we take 1 over 24, which is the end of the first cycle, and add 28 over 24, which is the distance of a cycle. And that will get you 29 pi over 24, which will be your ending point of the 2 cycles. Okay, so now I've already plotted the points, and your first point, which was already given to you, you could have done before you did any work. You have negative 9 pi over 8, and then your middle point, which is negative 4. And then, so normally, like in the one before, you would label this coordinate, which we already found to be 28 over 24. But since it's 2 cycles, you're going to labeling the second cycle, which is the number you found after you added another 28 over 24, which in this case was 29 pi over 24. And just like before, you use the middle point, and it is negative 4. And that's your final answer. Now also remember, since it's negative 5, you always start going down to your first point. And like before, you always have to check the distances so you know whether your middle point, your first middle point, is positive or negative. And you only have to do that when your 2 points go from positive to negative. All right.
Okay, here's your first practice problem, so be ready to pause it and try this one on your own.
Ready, go.
Okay, so the first thing you should have done is looked at this point, put it here, gone up 2, down 2, then seen this point, and since it's a negative, changed it to a positive, put your first point here, put that into the equation, added this length to your first point, right now I'm converting these fractions so the denominators are the same. So that you would find as your last dot, or last x coordinate in your cycle. And since both our first and last point are on the positive side, we don't need to compare these and find out which one is farther from the y-axis, because we know that our middle point is obviously going to be on the positive side because it'll be in between these. So it'll be approximately there. And then you should have started right here, ended right here. And since it's a negative in front of this number, you should have started by going down, come back up to this negative 4 in the middle, gone up to negative 2y, and back down to here, and you should have gotten that. And then you should always, at the end of graphing your graph, label the coordinates. So we have pi over 4 as our x coordinate here, and then negative 4 as our y coordinate, and then 23 over pi over 28, negative 4. And that's what you should have gotten.
Okay, so here's your second practice problem. So get ready to pause the video and try this one on your own. Ready? Go.
Okay, for this last one, you should have the hang of it by now, so just check your answers. We get, for your first coordinate, you get negative 15 pi over 7, comma negative 2. And then for the last one, which is the end of your second cycle, is 67 pi divided by 21, comma negative 4.